Welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're here today, because we are about to take an incredible, mind-bending journey straight up. You know, we spend our entire lives walking around on the surface of the Earth, looking up at the sky, and taking the air we breathe completely for granted. But today, we're going to travel straight up, right through those invisible layers above our heads, to answer a deceptively simple question. Where does our planet actually end?
Just think about this for a second. If you could point your car straight up into the sky and just hit the gas, cruising at typical highway speeds, assuming there's no traffic up there, of course, you would theoretically reach space in just about an hour. It's crazy. It makes the great cosmic void feel astonishingly close. But as you're making that vertical road trip, staring out your windshield, at what exact moment do you stop being a driver in the sky and start being an astronaut in space? Where does the sky officially end?
Okay, let's dive into this. Part 1. The upward journey, ascending through Earth's layers.
To find the actual edge of space, we first have to understand what we're traveling through. Our atmosphere doesn't just hit a sudden brick wall and stop. There's no physical finish line floating up there. Instead, our envelope of gas just slowly and gradually fades out. Scientists divide this huge fade out into distinct layers, and each one is defined by radical shifts in temperature, chemical composition, movement, and density.
Let's rapidly track our physical ascent through these lower and middle layers. First up, we launch right through the troposphere. This is home to literally all of our weather and the breathable air, everything from sea level all the way to the peak of Mount Everest. Next, we hit the stratosphere, which stretches up to about 50 kilometers. This is where our vital ozone layer lives, and it's where commercial jets fly to avoid all the turbulent weather down below. Keep pushing upward and we enter the mesosphere. It's the coldest part of the atmosphere, yet the gases here are still just thick enough to cause incoming meteors to slow down and burn up in those fiery streaks we see across the night sky.
Moving on to Part 2. Meeting Theodore von Karman and the search for the boundary.
So, as the air gets thinner and thinner, we need someone to help us draw a line in the sky. Enter a brilliant mid-20th century physicist and engineer named Theodore von Karman. He wasn't necessarily trying to invent some legal border for countries. He really just wanted to know, at what altitude does an airplane stop functioning like an airplane? His work ultimately gave birth to what we now call the Kármán Line. Globally, this is the most widely recognized standard for the boundary of outer space, officially set at 100 kilometers or about 62.1 miles above mean sea level. The concept is super elegant. Below this line, you're dealing with the physics of aeronautics. Above it, conventional aircraft simply cannot fly, and the physics of astronautics, spaceflight, take over entirely.
Now, what's really interesting about this next part, Part 3, the mathematical twist, the physics of 84 kilometers. There is a massive historical quirk hiding behind that neat round number of 100 kilometers. It turns out Theodore von Karman's original calculations for fluid dynamics never actually landed on 100 kilometers. His math pointed to a boundary much closer to 84 kilometers, which is roughly 52 miles. He calculated that right around this 84-kilometer mark, the atmosphere becomes so incredibly thin that an aircraft would have to travel at orbital velocity, essentially flying so fast that it's perpetually falling around the curvature of the Earth, just to generate enough lift to stay aloft.
So you're probably wondering, where did the 100-kilometer standard actually come from? Well, in the early 1960s, the FAI, the world's governing body for aeronautic records, decided to officially set the boundary. But instead of using von Karman's precise 84 kilometers, they simply rounded up. They chose 100 kilometers just because it was a clean, easily remembered number that made international record-keeping simpler. Essentially, they rounded up because the math was messy. It was a totally pragmatic concession that effectively overshadowed the original scientific accuracy.
To really grasp why that 84-kilometer mark is so scientifically profound, we have to contrast how vehicles actually move. Think about aerodynamic flight. It relies entirely on dense air flowing over the shape of a wing to generate physical lift. Without enough air molecules, you drop. On the flip side, you have ballistic flight, which is how rockets travel. Rockets don't care about wings. Their flight is totally governed by thrust, momentum, and gravity in a near vacuum. Von Karman basically proved that at 84 kilometers, aerodynamic flight fundamentally breaks down. You are no longer flying, you are quite literally a projectile.
That brings us to Part 4, dueling definitions, who gets to decide?
Because of this historical decision to just round up for convenience, different powerful organizations today operate under completely different rules for where space actually is. On one side, you have the FAI standard up at 100 kilometers. But the US military and NASA, they never really bought into the whole rounding up thing.
They officially recognized the boundary of space at 80.5 kilometers, or exactly 50 miles. In fact, back in the 1950s and 60s, the U.S. Air Force famously awarded official astronaut wings to pilots of the experimental X-15 rocket plane who managed to cross that 50-mile threshold, legally recognizing them as true spacefarers.
And what's really fascinating is that modern science is stepping right in to back up this lower boundary. Back in 2018, a Harvard astrophysicist named Jonathan McDowell published a study where he observed the behavior of about 50 satellites. He proved that satellites can actually maintain their orbits perfectly well, dipping all the way down to the 80-kilometer mark without burning up or falling out of the sky. This heavily validates von Karman's original fluid dynamics math over the FAI's arbitrary rounded number.
So, the crucial point is coming up here in Part 5, Space Law and Sovereign Airspace, Why a 15-kilometer difference matters.
You might be thinking, does it really matter if the line is at 84 kilometers or 100 kilometers? It's just a 15-kilometer difference in a massive sky. But legally and politically, that gap is literally everything. See, under international law, specifically the Chicago Convention, every nation has complete and exclusive sovereignty over the airspace above its territory. If you fly in it without permission, you are violating international law. Now compare that to the chaotic, free-flowing space environment. According to the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, space is a global commons. It's free for exploration by anyone, and it cannot be owned by any nation. So exactly where that invisible boundary gets drawn dictates entirely whose laws apply.
When you break it down, the debate is really a clash between political control and scientific accuracy. Keeping the line higher at 100 kilometers totally benefits governments. It extends a nation's sovereign vertical territory by an extra 15 kilometers, granting way more authority to manage domestic law and aerial traffic. On the other hand, lowering the line to 84 kilometers aligns with actual physical science. Moreover, a lower, scientifically backed line would clear up a really dangerous legal gray zone for the exploding commercial spaceflight industry, finally giving companies definitive rules on liability and jurisdiction for suborbital tourism.
Let's move to and see how this builds in Part 6, the exosphere extreme, pushing to the absolute limit.
What if we just completely throw out both the 84 and 100-kilometer marks and instead look at the literal, physical edge of our atmosphere? If you define space as the absolute point where Earth's atmosphere ceases to exist entirely, you have to travel all the way through the thermosphere and into the exosphere. This is our planet's ultimate outermost layer. And get this, it stretches an astonishing 10,000 kilometers, that's 6,200 miles above the Earth. Up here, there are still gravitationally bound hydrogen and helium molecules, but they are so unbelievably spread out that they are virtually collisionless. They just slowly thin out, bleeding invisibly into the vacuum of deep space.
Which leaves us with this final, completely mind-bending paradox to ponder. The International Space Station orbits the Earth at an altitude of about 400 kilometers. Now that is well beyond the Kármán Line, but it is deeply embedded inside Earth's atmospheric exosphere, which reaches all the way to 10,000 kilometers. So if the exosphere doesn't officially end until 10,000 kilometers up, are International Space Station astronauts even in space? If we measure by the physical atmosphere, our most celebrated astronauts haven't actually left Earth's atmosphere at all. It brilliantly illustrates how the boundaries we draw, whether for world records, sovereign nations, or sheer scientific curiosity, are ultimately just human attempts to put a neat frame around the endless, awe-inspiring gradient of our universe. Thanks so much for exploring this with us today.